It looks like we're having a very popular talk today, which is exciting. My name's Alex Belser. I was asked to stand in as the moderator for the next three speakers. And I'd like to welcome you all. This is the ego, death, ego dissolution. So you're in the right place. I hope you're ready for it. It's coming very soon. So I'm not going to take up much time. I just wanted to introduce each speaker in turn, and I'm very excited to hear their talks. In addition to ego death as a sort of common thread, I believe all three speakers have graduate degrees from the University of Oxford, so they come from the other place, and it's exciting for, as well as other excellent universities in the UK and Europe and the United States. I'd first like to introduce Raphael Milliere, who I've just had the pleasure of meeting. He is a doctoral candidate at in philosophy at Oxford, and he's also affiliated with the Center for Subjectivity Research in Copenhagen, and to Artemok. It's a research group based in Paris on consciousness. So everybody, please welcome our speaker. Thank you. You're going to need this. Yeah.
Hello, thank you very much. So just a few words before I begin. I am doing a PhD in philosophy, but I'm very much working in the part of philosophy which is at the crossroads between philosophy and cognitive science. And the talk you're going to hear today is not very philosophical at heart, although my interest in ego dissolution stems from philosophical interest. Maybe we can talk about that later. So I'm going to talk about narrative reports of drug-induced ego dissolution, and I'm going to approach this topic from a quantitative standpoint using data mining and machine learning. So there are a lot of words in this title, so I'm going to start with drug-induced ego dissolution, because it's not a simple task to try to define this expression. So the phenomenon known as ego dissolution, which is often nowadays briefly described as a breakdown of one's sense of self, and if it's drug-induced, this happens obviously during psychedelic or otherwise psychoactive experiences. This phenomenon was noticed quite early on during early experimental studies with drugs. So with mescaline, for instance, and in Huxley's description, you find this expression, final stage of egolessness. With LSD as well, feelings of non-existence, fear of impending dissolution, feelings of disembodiment, and feelings of unity with the universe. Yeah, lots of references. And with psilocybin, similar effects were reported as well. More recently, this notion of ego dissolution has re-emerged in psychometric questionnaires, and especially Adolf Dietrich's so-called APZ questionnaire, which has three main clusters of items. A cluster regarding visual imagery called visual restructuration, a cluster regarding what he called oceanic boundlessness. It's a very imaginative way of putting it. So it describes the positively felt depersonalization, derealization, and feelings of unity. And it's rated by items such as, it seemed to me that my environment and I were one. And also related to ego dissolution is the third item cluster, dread of ego dissolution, which refers to distressing experiences of depersonalization, thought disorder, and loss of thought and body control, such as I observed myself as though I were a stranger. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about questionnaires, because I think Matthew Neuro, speaking after me, will talk about his recent work with an ego dissolution inventory. But it's important to notice that ego dissolution, broadly construed, encompasses these two item clusters, and not just this one, although it's called ego dissolution, because these are more or less positively felt ego dissolution and negatively felt ego dissolution, and I will come back on this later. All right, so it's been noticed, I won't go into details, that there is, with all the substances, you have a significantly higher score than placebo on the item clusters, oceanic boundlessness and dread of ego dissolution, when the APZ questionnaire is used. So this is indicative that something happens with these drugs, and this phenomenon we call ego dissolution seems to be happening fairly frequently with especially high doses. I don't have much time, so I think I'll skip that. Yeah, so there is another inventory invented to measure ego disturbances in schizophrenia. The important take-home message is that it gives the same kind of conclusion regarding psychoactive drugs or a subset of them, that they seem also to disturb the sense of self or the sense of ego. All right, so now I'm just going to say a few words about the possible limitations of questionnaires to investigate this phenomenon. So the first thing is that most studies with questionnaires, self-report questionnaires, have a small sample size. Usually, I mean, you might have seen this from other studies which were presented at this conference. Usually, it's between 10 and 30 healthy participants. And of course, this is normal because it's complete. These studies are complicated to do, and it's complicated to recruit a participant which pass the screening phase and so on. But nonetheless, when you're trying to investigate such a complex phenomenon, this is a small sample size. Also, ego dissolution in these questionnaires, in most questionnaires, is reduced to one or a few items. So. And it's also a lexicon which is imposed by scientists to the ones who are rating these items. So for instance, to give you a couple of examples in recent studies, this is one item which was used to rate ego dissolution in a study in 2013. I experienced a disintegration of myself or ego. Another one, I lost all sense of ego. Well, this might be problematic because this imposes a certain vocabulary to the people describing the experience. So there might be some kind of confirmation bias to a little extent in there, and also there is no formal definition of ego dissolution in most of the cases. Ego ego and self are both very polysemous terms, extremely polysemous terms. There are countless, endless discussions in philosophy about sub-distinctions between certain definitions of self, and I think just referring to dissolution of the sense of self is not very enlightening. So Enterera.org, most of you might be familiar with this website. This is a very old website. It actually predates Wikipedia, interestingly. So it was created in 1995, so it's more than 20 years old. And it's a curated database of trip reports where people can log in, say what they've taken, with what dose, what is their age, weight, and then give a detailed description of their experience. And only the best descriptions, ideally, are kept on the website. So you have metadata. I said it about these kind of things. And at this stage, there are more than 20,000 reports. All right, and this is data which is available for everyone on the internet, but it remains largely unexplored from a scientific standpoint. And with good reason until now, because it's a very noisy data, and it's hard to control all the parameters. So it has studying these reports has a lot of potential advantages. It's a very large sample size, more than 100 times bigger than the average experiment. And you have potentially rich descriptions, and ideally, studying them would be a bottom-up process where you only pick on the kind of words that people use and not impose your own vocabulary on them. All right, I'm really constrained by time. So I'll just introduce data mining very quickly. So data mining refers to computer-assisted discovery of patterns, semantic patterns, in large data sets. And during the last few years, data mining using machine learning, with which you train computers to find the semantic patterns on their own, has opened the way to this new field called natural language processing, which allows us to study natural language descriptions, so just like normal descriptions using normal words, to find semantic patterns in them. So this opens a new way to study Airways.org reports. So what are the theoretical problems with mining the data from error rate? Well, it's hard to extract data from natural language descriptions. Error rate data can be especially noisy. And ego dissolution, on top of that, is an elusive phenomenon, often deemed ineffable. So that's quite a hard problem. So here is my pipeline. What I did, I first selected a subset of substances which could induce drug-induced ego dissolution. I scraped the reports from error rates. I analyzed the lexicon of ego dissolution based on all the reports. Then I tried to find methods to single out ego dissolution reports, and then I analyzed them. So I'm going to go in more details about each of these if I have the time. So these are the substances I selected based on previous studies, which seem to be indicative that all of these substances can induce this phenomenon of ego dissolution. Then I scraped the data. So the thing is, a lot of people on error rate in reports use more than one drug. So a lot of psychonauts out there. So excluding drug combinations, for all these substances, you get 3,500 reports, or more or less, and including them, you get more, much more actually. And so this is the breakdown per substances for excluding drug combinations. All right, so I'm going to say a few words about how I investigated the lexicon of ego dissolution. So first of all, the simplest thing you can do when you have a big corpus of text is look for occurrences. So of course this is not very informative, but it's the first step to peek into the data, so to speak. So these are the occurrences of the words and expressions ego, ego death, ego loss, and ego dissolution. And you can see right away, interestingly, that the word ego dissolution, which is today used by scientists much more frequently than these other expressions, is much less used by users. And a possible explanation of this is that in the current countercultural discourse, especially fueled by the writings of Timothy Leary, the word ego death is quite popular. So this is the same data for ego death and ego with a breakdown by substance. Sorry, we can go back if you have questions later to one of these graphs. I have a lot of graphs, so I'm forced to go quite quickly. All right, this is not fundamental. This is all the what's called bigrams, so sequences of two words which have ego in them, and these are the most popular. All right, enter word vectors. So word vectors is a technique, a machine learning technique, to transform all words in a corpus into n-dimensional vectors. And this is very interesting because it allows us to study the text in a completely different way, because you can perform algebra on the words. So you can add vectors together to get the combined meaning of two terms. You can also subtract vectors, you can do all sorts of operations on them, and this can preserve semantic patterns because it can preserve analogies. I unfortunately don't have time to go into the details, but these are the vectors when you perform a word vector analysis of the whole corpus, which are most similar to the addition of the vector ego with the vector death. So that's interesting because we see that it's often associated with insanity. I mean, it's very significantly higher than the others. But it's also associated with both positive and negative words. So if you go in the longer list, you have also bliss down there, but you have fear, but also and terror, but also enlightenment, birth, rebirth. So it confirms like the kind of trend that you find in the APZ questionnaire, that there are two different types of experiences depending on how you react to this phenomenon. So this is a projection in 2 dimensions, which loses quite a bit of information because these are vectors with up to 100 dimensions, but this is just for ego, and this is for ego plus death. So you see, you have the same kind of words. All right, so now moving to the most important part, trying to isolate reports of ego dissolution. How do you do that when you have thousands of reports and you want to automatize it? Because you want a bias-free way of selecting ego dissolution reports. So the first method is what's called keywords in context. So this is the process. You take typical descriptions of ego dissolution, you try to identify semantic patterns in them, and then you come up with an optimal set of keywords associated with context words. So what I found the most, after a lot of tinkering, the most interesting way to do this was to look for the keywords ego and self within the context of around 100 context words, such as dissolve, drift, go and die, and I have a lot of them. And there is a context, what you call a context horizon of 4 words, left and right. So this means that if the words ego or death appear next to one of these 100 context words within 4 words, then the report is selected. You have a few examples here. And this seemed to be one of the most robust ways to come up with an interesting subset of reports using the keywords in context method, which is kind of a dirty method because it's not bottom-up. As you see, I had to come up with the context words and the keywords. So there might be a worry of confirmation bias in there, but I'll try to suggest later that it actually works pretty well. So this is the results. So that's interesting. So you see that you have, so you have to account to the fact, for instance, ayahuasca, there are much less reports. So this is the less significant number. But you have the same data here with the number of reports in total and the number of the subset of reports which seem to describe ego dissolution according to this method. So it seems like around 7% of the reports describe ego dissolution. I validated this with what's called keyword extraction, but we don't have time to go into this, unfortunately. And I tried to analyze the metadata, but it's too noisy in most cases. The only thing I could do is find that the average dose of dried mushroom for ego dissolution experiences is around 3.44 grams. So that's not very significantly higher than average. So there are pitfalls to this method, as I said. First of all, a lot of people some reports have meta-discourse about ego dissolution, like something like, I expected to have an ego dissolution experience, but in the end I didn't. And then if they say this, then the report will be selected as an ego dissolution report. Then you have the way that the kind of folk psychology theorizing contaminates the kind of lexicon used in the reports. So you could have false positives, and you can also have false negatives to give you risk of leaving out some other means of describing ego dissolution. The other method is called latent Dirichlet allocation. So this is a machine learning algorithm to automatically find topics in a document in a completely bottom-up way. All right, I have to skip this. I'm just going to show you a couple of visualization. So I performed LDA with 20 topics and 100 topics. You have to choose the number of topics you want to find. And here, can't remember, I think, yeah, this is the report which seemed to be most associated with ego dissolution. So you have ego here. And you have consciousness, perception, sense, state, entity, awareness. So this is not very informative because you only have 20 topics. When you have 100 topics, you find more specific subsets related to ego dissolution. I don't have time to go into too much detail right now. But you're welcome to find me afterwards and we can talk about it. All right, so let me just go back. All right. So now, very brief analysis. I'll skip this. Very brief qualitative analysis of the subset of reports I got in the end using all these techniques. So, a very common theme is the kind of description of loss of self-awareness. It's very common to find these kind of expressions. I felt as if I did no longer exist. So pure consciousness without self-awareness. I experienced a total loss of consciousness, not in the medical sense, knocked unconscious, but in the sense of being self-awareness. I think it was mostly a loss of awareness and thought until nothing is left, but pure experience. I between brackets, this is very common. People are reluctant to use the word I, but they're forced to do it for grammatical reasons, but this is quite interesting. I don't exist, but my consciousness does, etc. The me that processes awareness stopped existing. you have also the feeling of dying. This is another common thread. The loss of self-worth boundaries. I felt myself mold into the world around me. And the loss of body ownership, finally. So future directions. I think the future is to try to get better descriptions. And one of my projects is to use open-ended interviews with specific interview methods with drug users to try to get very detailed descriptions of the phenomenology of ego dissolution, because I think this is very needed. Using better natural language processing methods to analyze reports. And also try to use this method. This is something that's not being done yet. Try to compare ego dissolution induced by psychedelics, those induced by dissociative anesthetics such as ketamine, and those induced by kappa-opioid receptor agonists such as Salvia. So yeah, I'll stop here. Thank you very much.